You could argue that if the beta had simply let the girl clear his table in peace, he'd never have ended that night on his knees, before the entire Karn pack. But then again, if the Alpha King had troubled himself to come home a single winter sooner, there'd have been no beta left lording over a half-starved hall to begin with. So really, when you followed the thread all the way back to where it started, the whole ruinous business belonged to the king. Every last splinter of it. Marin would come to think about that a great deal later. At the time, she was only thinking about the ale. Marin had carried trays at the Split Antler since she was 11, which was the winter Halden found her asleep in the tannery ditch and decided, for reasons he never once explained, that she was worth a cot and a trade. She was not much of a talker, she was even less of a fighter. What she was a woman who had never in her life forgotten a tab, not a cup, not a coin, not a slate, and who had learned early that the safest place in any crowded room is the quiet edge of it, where you can watch everyone and no one bothers to watch you. The hall that night was loud in the particular way it got loud, when there was nothing left to celebrate, and everyone was determined to celebrate anyway. 3 years, the king had been gone, off at the border wars, where the northern packs kept testing the passes, and 3 years the pack had been left in the keeping of his beta. Rurik sat at the head table, the way a man sits in a chair. He has decided is a throne, sprawled, easy, one boot up on the bench, watching the room like a landlord watching rent. The pack drank his ale and laughed at his jokes and did not say, because no one said it aloud anymore, that the grain stores were 3/4 empty while Rurik's own cellar had somehow never run dry. Marin said it, not loudly. Not to him. She said it in a ledger she kept in her own head, tallied and carried and never spoken. The 40 casks of winter grain the pack was taxed for, and the 12 that reached the stores. The widows told the pension coffer was empty, the children going gaunt in the lower rows, while the head table ate its third course. She poured his ale and remembered every figure and said nothing, because saying something was how a girl from a tannery ditch ended up back in one. It might have stayed that way forever, except that Rurik was bored, and boredom in a powerful man is a kind of weather. It arrives, and things get broken. He didn't look at her when he said it. He was smiling at the hall, playing to it. Girl, come here. She came. You did. When a beta crooked a finger at you. She stopped a respectful pace back, the jug held in both hands, eyes down where a wolf keeps her eyes when a beta has decided to be entertained. They tell me, Rurik said, loud now for the room, that you count. Is that so? That our little serving girl keeps a ledger up here. He tapped his temple, sharper than the king's own reeve. He let the pack laugh. Go on then. They say you've been counting my cups, counting what comes and goes from my cellar. That true? The hall went the particular quiet of a crowd that has smelled blood and is pretending it hasn't. Here was the trap, laid plain. Say no, and she was a liar. And a beta may do as he likes with a liar. Say yes, and she was a servant who spied on her betters, and a beta may do worse. Rurik knew it. He wanted the flush and the stammer, the small, satisfying spectacle of a nobody realizing she was nobody, and he raised his cup to enjoy it. Something in Marin, some quiet thing that had been holding its breath for 3 years, simply let go. Yes, she said. The word landed in the silence, like a coin on stone. I count, she went on, and her voice did not shake, which surprised no one more than her. I've counted since I was old enough to carry a tray. 40 casks of grain were levied off this valley at first frost. The stores took 12. The rest went east up the King's Road on carts nobody logged, and came back as the wine at this table. She set the jug down, unhurried, and the small sound of it was the loudest thing in the room. The widow Sina was told the pension chest was dry. The same week you paid a horse trader 40 crowns for a grey mare. The East Rows are eating bark bread. Your hounds are eating better than the East Rows. She lifted her eyes, then, and met his, which a wolf of her station is never ever meant to do. You asked if it's true that I count. It's true. Would you like me to keep going? I can go all night. I've a very long memory and you've given it a great deal to hold. Nobody breathed. Somewhere a bench creaked, and then thought better of it. Rurik's smile had gone somewhere and not come back. You forget yourself, he said softly, and softly from a beta is worse than shouting. You forget what you are. No, Marin said. That's the trouble. I remember exactly what I am. I'm the one who's still here when the feast is over and the floor wants scrubbing. I'm the one who's watched this hall go hungry with a smile on my face, because smiling was safer. And then she did the reckless thing, the thing she would lie awake replaying for weeks, the thing that could not afterward be taken back. She reached behind her, untied the knot of her apron, and dropped it on the head table in front of him, a small heap of gray cloth in all that firelight. There, she said. If any wolf in this hall thinks he can keep the king's table better than I've kept it, go on, take the apron, wear it a week. That goes for you. Beta, her chin came up. And to that goes for the king himself, if he ever remembers he has a hall to come home to. It was on reflection an enormous amount to say. The pack sat frozen between the horror of it and the awful delight of it, that giddy held breath you feel watching someone do the thing you'd never dare. Rurik rose from his seat, slow, and the temperature of the room dropped with him, and Marin understood distantly, the way you understand weather, that she had gone too far to walk back and would now find out what too far cost. And then, from the shadowed table at the very back of the hall, the table nearest the door, where a travel-worn man, in a plain dark coat, had been nursing the same cup of ale for an hour, the cup Marin herself had filled twice without a second glance, a chair scraped back across the stone. The man stood. He was not a large man, made larger by temper, the way Rurik was. He was simply still, in a way that made the whole roaring hall feel suddenly embarrassingly loud. Road dust on his shoulders. 3 years of border weather in his face. He set his cup down with the unbothered care of a man who has all the time in the world and has never once had to hurry to be obeyed. And the Karn pack, as one body, went to its knees. All but Marin, who had never once seen the king's face closer than the coins she counted, and who was therefore the very last soul in that hall to understand that she had just thrown her apron down and dared the Alpha King of the Karn to his face in front of everyone he ruled. Marin's first thought, absurd and immediate, was, I filled his cup twice and never looked at him once. Her second thought had no words in it at all. It was only her wolf, that animal thing that lived under her skin and usually kept its own counsel, flattening itself to the floor of her and going very, very quiet, the way every wolf in the hall had gone quiet, all their bristling packlust, folding at once into the presence of a true alpha, the real thing. Home at last, and standing 10 paces from her with dust on his coat, Emmerich, king of the Karn, 3 years at the passes, and no herald, no banners, no procession up the king's road, so the valley could line it and cheer. He had come home the way weather comes home, without asking, and he had come home to find his beta lording over a starving hall and a serving girl throwing an apron at the pair of them. He crossed the room. He did not hurry. He never, she would learn, hurried. He stopped at the head table, looked at Rurik still half risen from his stolen throne, and then he looked down at the small gray heap of Marin's apron lying in the firelight, and for a long moment the king of the Karn considered a serving girl's apron, as though it were a document brought to him for judgment. 3 years, Emmerich said, to no one in particular, and the most honest accounting of my kingdom I've heard all night came from the person refilling the cups. His voice was dry as the road he'd ridden in on. He let his pale gaze settle on the half-risen beta. Down, Rurik! And Rurik went down, not to the bench, but to his knees. There on the flagstones before the whole hall he'd lorded over, his own wolf folding under the weight of a true alpha before his pride could think to stop it. It was a remarkable thing to watch a man, that size, brought onto the stone, by a single word. Then the king turned and looked at Marin directly, and she learned what it was to have that stillness aimed at her alone. His eyes were a pale, weathered gray, and they were not cruel, and that was somehow worse, because cruelty she knew how to brace for. "You dared me to come home," he said. "To my own hall." "Your Majesty," her voice, which had held steady through the whole mad speech, chose this moment to abandon her entirely. "You did. I heard it. So did everyone." A pause. Something moved at the corner of his mouth that on a lesser face might have been the beginning of a smile, and here was only a rumor of one. "It's a novel experience. I find I haven't decided yet whether I liked it." He straightened. "Go home, Erin." She had not told him her name. She would think about that later, too. "Go home," he said again, "and sleep, if you can. We'll speak of what you're owed when I've slept myself. I've been 3 years without a bed that didn't move." And he turned and walked out of the hall into the dark, leaving the entire pack on its knees, leaving Rurik gray-faced at the head table, leaving Marin standing alone in the one patch of floor in all of Carnhold that no one, suddenly. "When I've slept, what you're owed." She turned the words over the whole way home, and could not make them lie flat. Owe it a reward? Owe it a reckoning? A king could mean either. A king could mean both. She did not sleep. By dawn, the split antler had become a kind of shrine to her disaster. Tobin was waiting on the cot outside her door before the birds, all 17 years of him vibrating with the news, and Iva arrived a breath behind him with her arms crossed and her mouth set flat, which was how Iva looked when she was frightened and refused to show it. "So," Tobin began. "Careful, the way you approach a horse that's been struck by lightning. Big night. Don't." Marin pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes. "You told the beta his hounds eat better than the East Rose," Tobin said, awed. "You said it with the numbers. And then He couldn't even finish. He mimed helplessly, the untying of an apron, and the dropping of it, as though reenacting a myth. "I know what I did, do you?" Eva said, and her voice was too even. "Because I don't think you do, Marin. You threw down your apron and dared the king. There are old laws about daring the alpha. There are laws about a wolf of no rank raising her eyes to a beta. Never mind." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "Halden's been up all night." "He's white as a fish. He keeps saying he shouldn't have taken you in, and I don't think he means it the way it sounds. I think he means he can't stand to lose you and he's scared to death." That was the thing that got under Marin's ribs, not the danger to herself, which she'd made her peace with somewhere around the second cask of grain, but Halden. The one man who had ever looked at a ditch girl and seen something worth a cot. He'd believed in her when it cost him custom and the good opinion of every respectable wolf in the valley, and she had repaid him by becoming, in a single evening, the most talked-about mouth in Carnhold. "Est case," Iva went on, relentless because gentleness would have broken them both. "The king's forgotten your name by midday, and you scrub floors somewhere the beta can't see you. Worst case," she didn't finish that one either. She didn't have to. Everyone in the valley knew what a beta did to a wolf who'd shamed him in open hall, and a beta could do it quietly, and a king 3 years absent might not trouble himself to notice one missing serving girl. "He knew my name," Marin said. Iva blinked. "What? The king? He called me Marin. I never told it to him." She looked between the two of them, and the small cold fact of it sat in the room and would not be explained away. Why would the king know the name of a girl who fills his cup? None of them had an answer, and then, from the yard below, came a sound that stopped the question in all their throats, the clean, carrying ring of a horn at the tavern gate. Not the town watch, not a delivery, an arrival, formal and announced, the kind that came from only one house in the whole valley. Tobin went to the window and came back the color of ash. "There are king's men in the yard," he whispered. "And they're asking for the girl who threw down her apron. They did not drag her. That was the first surprise." Marin had braced for hands on her arms for the whole valley, to watch her marched up the king's road, and instead, the captain of the king's men, an old gray wolf with a scar through one eyebrow and a courtesy she hadn't earned, simply said the king requested her presence and offered her a horse, and waited while she said a wordless goodbye to Halden that neither of them trusted themselves to speak aloud. Carnhold in daylight was a different beast than the hall she'd served in. She had only ever seen the king's seat from the servant's side of things, the loading yards and the kitchens and the long gray corridors where the help moved like water and were about as noticed. Now, she was walked up the wide way, past the great doors, into a receiving room where the morning light came down clean through high windows. And there, of course, was Emeric. He had slept. She could see it. The road dust gone, the weather in his face eased into something merely tired. He looked, without 3 years of border on him, alarmingly young for a man who could make a hall drop to its knees by standing up. He was reading a ledger when she came in, her ledger. She realized with a lurch, the real one, the tavern's true accounts, that only she and Halden kept, that someone had fetched up the hill in the night. "You were right about the grain," he said, without looking up. "To the cask. It's rather worse than you said, actually, which I didn't think was possible." He closed the book. "Sit." She sat. "Now." He set his hands flat on the table and considered her with those weathered gray eyes. "You've caused me a problem, Marin. Would you like to know what it is?" "I'd assumed I was the problem, Your Majesty." "No, that's the trouble. You're the solution, and it's very inconvenient." He said it lightly, but the eyes stayed steady on her. "I came home to a beta who's been bleeding my pack, white, and a court that will swear on their mothers they never noticed. Every wolf in that hall has spent 3 years learning not to see what Rurik does, and every one of them has something to lose by remembering. And then there's you." He tilted his head. "A girl with no rank, no house, no coin, and nothing whatsoever to lose, who has apparently spent those same 3 years remembering everything on purpose. Do you see my difficulty? You're the only honest ledger in my kingdom, and you're holding it in your head. And last night you announced as much to every soul who'd most like it forgotten." The cold understanding arrived slowly. "You think the beta will—" "I think," Emeric said, "that a wolf who shames a beta in open hall does not, historically, enjoy a long and restful retirement. I think that if I send you back to the Split Antler this afternoon, you'll have an accident inside the month, and it will be very sad, and no one will be able to prove a thing." He said it without drama, which was what made it land. "So, I find I have to keep you where he can't reach you. And it happens, you handed me the means to do it, last night, in front of everyone." A rumor of that smile. Again. "You threw down your apron? You dared any wolf in the hall to take it up and keep the king's table better than you. Do you remember?" Dread arrived a full second before comprehension. "Your Majesty, I'm taking the apron." He said it, to the room as much as to her, and she understood he intended it to be repeated, to travel down the hill by nightfall, to reach Rurik over his supper. "You dared me to come home and keep my own house. Very well, I'm home. And I'll keep it with the one wolf who's proven she can. At my side, at my table, in my hall, where no beta breathing would dare touch what belongs to the king's own household." He let that last phrase sit, deliberate, waited, because in the old speech of the pack, the king's own was not a job. It was a claim. It was the word a wolf used for what he meant to keep. Marin's mouth went dry. People will think exactly what keeps you alive," Emeric said. "Let them." For a moment she couldn't find any words at all, and then too many arrived at once. "I'm a serving girl. I fill cups. I can't just be installed in the king's hall, because I embarrassed myself in front of the pack. They'll say I schemed for it. They'll say a great deal." He rose and crossed to the tall window and looked down over his valley with his hands clasped behind his back. "Here is what I'll say. Last night, The truest things spoken in my kingdom came from the person no one thought worth listening to. I've had 3 years of men telling me pretty numbers. I would like for a change to be told the true ones, by someone who owes the beta nothing and fears me too little for her own good. He glanced back at her over his shoulder. Take the apron, Marin. Not the gray one, mine. She should have refused. Later she would try to remember why she hadn't, and the honest answer, the ditch girl answer she'd never say aloud, was that no one had ever once told her that the thing she was, the watching, the counting, the long unforgetting memory, was worth a place at the table instead of a reason to be kept beneath it. Fine, she heard herself say, and her voice came out smaller and rougher than she'd meant. I'll keep your books, but I won't lie in them. Not for you. Not for anyone. If you've a rot in this house, I'll write it down plain, even if the rot has your name on it. Something flickered across the king's face, surprise, and under it, quick and gone, something that looked almost like relief. I'm counting on it, Emmerich said, and that should have been the end of it. A strange bargain struck in a bright room. A girl saved from a beta by a king's convenient claim. Except that as she rose to go, Marin caught the king's eyes cut, just once, to the far door where Rurik had appeared unbidden in the frame, and she saw the look that passed between the two most powerful wolves in the valley. It was not a master's irritation with a thieving servant. It was older than that, and colder, and it went both ways. The king had not come home to feast, she understood, with the slow-dropping certainty of a woman who had spent her life reading runes. He had come home, hunting something. And he had just in front of everyone tied a serving girl to his side and called it protection. She wondered, walking out past the beta's flat and hating stare, which of them she was really meant to be, the king's honest ledger, or the bait in a snare she couldn't yet see the shape of. The court of Karnhold received Marin the way a body receives a splinter, with a great deal of quiet effort aimed at working her back out. No one was rude to her face. That was not how highborn wolves did their unkindness. They simply failed to see her, stepped around her in corridors as though she were furniture set down in an inconvenient place, went silent when she entered and too loud when she left. She had spent her whole life being unseen on purpose, at the safe edge of rooms, and found it a strange and bitter joke that now, when she'd finally been dragged into the middle of one, they'd invented a way to unsee her anyway. She did not much care. They had given her a room with a window and a door that locked, which was 2 more things than she'd ever owned, and they had given her the accounts. Gods, the accounts. She had thought the tavern's books were a snarl. The packs were a catastrophe, dressed as a filing system, 3 years of requisitions that argued with each other, tallies in 4 different hands, whole seasons of grain and coin, and iron logged, as received, and then a page later awaited as though the same cart could be forever arriving and never quite arrive. She worked by candle, late into the nights, because the days were full of stewards who resented answering her and pretended not to hear the questions. She unpicked it, thread by thread, the way she unpicked everything, patiently remembering each loose end so she could tie it to the next. Emmerich came to the counting room more than a king had any business doing. The first night, he simply appeared in the doorway, with a heel of dark bread and a wedge of hard yellow cheese, filched, she suspected, straight off a kitchen board, and set half of it down by her candle without a word, as though feeding the help at midnight were an ordinary kingly duty. The second night, he stayed and read over her shoulder. By the 4th, he had pulled up a stool and was arguing with her about grain. This can't be right, he said, jabbing a blunt finger at a column. You've the East Granary, drawing rations for 200 men. It is right. There aren't 200 men at the East Granary. There are 40. There are 40 men, Marin agreed, and 160 ghosts, and the ghosts eat very well. She turned the ledger so he could see it. Somebody's been drawing bread for men who died or deserted or never existed, and selling the surplus back down the valley at a markup. It's an old trick. My, she caught herself. It's an old trick. You feed the dead on paper and pocket what the living don't eat. He was quiet a moment, reading. How would you stop it? Count heads, not names. A name can't stand in a yard and answer for itself. A man has to. But I've no standing to muster the granary. I'm the girl who fills the cups, remember. I can find the theft, I can't make it stop. You can now. He said it the way another man might have said, pass the salt. Anything that's bleeding this pack, you cancel it. Muster whom you like. If a steward argues, tell him the words came from me. And if he keeps arguing, tell me his name. He tore the cheese in half and handed her the larger piece. Consider that you're standing. She stared at him. You can't just hand a ditch girl the run of your granaries. I appear to have just done it. A pause. And then the rumor of that smile she was learning to watch for. You've the face of someone who's caught me doing something illegal. You've the sense of someone who's never once been told no. That's largely accurate, he admitted, though it's improved dramatically in the last week, and something in the dry, tired honesty of it undid her. And before she'd decided to, she was laughing. A real one, surprised out of her, the first she could remember in longer than she'd admit. He looked at her when she did it, looked a beat too long. The way you look at a thing you didn't expect to find and now can't quite set down. She stopped laughing. He went back to the ledger. Neither of them said anything about it. And the candle burned, and it was, she would think much later, the first genuinely dangerous moment of the whole affair, and she hadn't even seen it coming. You could have flattered me, he said, near dawn, apropos of nothing, as he rose to go. That first night in the hall, you'd have been safer. Everyone flatters me. I'm told I'm marvelous, roughly 40 times a day. Would you have believed it? Not for a heartbeat. Then you already know why I didn't bother. She didn't look up from the column. You're welcome, Your Majesty. He laughed on his way out the door, and she sat in the guttering light with warmth she did not want unfurling somewhere under her ribs, and she told herself it was only the cheese. It was near the bottom of the 3rd year's tally, 3 nights on, that she found the other one. Vurik's thieving she had mapped entire. Crude, greedy, a fat hand grabbing casks off a passing cart. But underneath it, threaded so carefully through the honest entries that she'd have missed it if she weren't the kind of woman who missed nothing, was a second theft, smaller, patient. Sums broken into pieces too small to notice and scattered across pages, so they'd never add up unless someone held the whole book in her head at once. Which was, of course, the one thing Marin could do. This hand didn't grab. It skimmed. It moved coin through the pack's accounts the way water moves through sand, leaving no puddle. And it was, she understood with a slow chill, far cleverer than the beta had ever been. She followed it 2 hours by candle, and could not put a face to it, but she knew the method. The way the figures were split and buried. The particular trick of hiding a theft inside a true number, she had seen that done before, learned at the elbow of the only teacher she'd ever had, and the thought of where she'd learned it sat in her chest like a swallowed stone she couldn't bring back up. Someone was robbing the pack far better than the beta ever had, and Marin knew that hand from somewhere. She just could not yet let herself name it. The East Granary stood at the bottom of the valley, where the King's Road met the river, a great timbered hulk of a building that should by rights have been full to the rafters at the tail of harvest, and was instead echoing and 2/3 empty, which was precisely why Marin wanted the king to see it with his own eyes. You keep telling me numbers, she'd said. Come and stand inside one. So he came, and brought no guard, but the old gray-scarred Captain Bracken, who trailed a respectful distance behind, and the 3 of them walked the long gallery of half-empty bays, while Marin pointed, and Emmerich grew quieter and quieter in the way she'd learned meant he was filing something away for someone to answer for later. 200 sacks logged in at first frost, she said, her voice ringing up into the rafters. There are 60. You paid for grain that walked out the river door the same night it. She stopped. It was nothing. It was less than nothing. A smell, wrong for the place. Wax and fine leather, where there should only have been dust and old wheat and river damp. A granary hand's boots did not smell of good leather. Her wolf came up under her skin before her mind had finished the thought, and she looked up, and high in the gallery where the great hoist rope ran taut under a laden pallet of stacked sacks, a full ton of grain slung 2 stories above the king's head. She saw the rope, and she saw that where it should have been thick, with 3 years' honest fraying, it had instead been cut nearly through. Clean and deliberate, a single dark strand from parting. Move. She didn't say it so much as throw it, and threw herself with it, both hands fisted in the king's coat, hauling him sideways with every scrap of strength a girl gets from years of wrestling full casks up cellar stairs. The rope let go with a crack like a snapped bone. The pallet came down where he had been standing and hit the flagstones. With a sound she felt in her teeth, grain and splintered timber bursting outward in a choking golden cloud, and through it she saw a shape drop from the gallery on the far side and bolt for the river door. One man, light and quick. Gone into the daylight before Bracken had his sword half drawn. Then it was quiet. Just the hiss of grain still pouring from the burst sacks, and the 2 of them on the floor where she dragged them, her arm thrown across his chest, her heart going like a war drum. Emmerich sat up. He looked at the ruin that would have been him. He brushed grain dust off his sleeve, with the unhurried care of a man flicking away a fly. "Well," he said, "that's one way to empty a granary." She stared at him. "You're not." The word wouldn't come. A ton of grain nearly came down on top of you and you're brushing your sleeve. Would you prefer I scream? I could scream if it would help. He got to his feet and offered her his hand, which she did not take, because she was already crossing to the fallen pallet, to the frayed end of the great rope where it lay across the spilled wheat. She crouched over it, ran her thumb across the cut. This was sawn, she said, halfway through and left to take the weight and finish itself. So it would look like the rope simply failed. An accident. Rotten luck. She looked up at him kneeling there, in the grain, with her pulse in her ears. This was meant to kill you and be mourned as carelessness. And that was when she saw him do the thing that turned her blood to river water. He crouched beside her, and he did not look shocked, and he did not look afraid. He looked at the sawn rope the way she looked at a crooked ledger, with recognition. He drew a kerchief from his coat, and he wrapped the cut end of the rope in it, carefully, and he put it in his pocket. Evidence. Catalogued. Filed away, with a soldier's economy, one more entry in some accounting. Only he could see. "How many?" Marin said slowly, and her voice did not sound like her own. "Times. Marin, how many times, Your Majesty, since you came home?" She was still crouched in the grain, and she would not rise, would not let him walk her out of this, the way he walked out of everything, sideways and smiling. A rope doesn't saw itself. And you knew it the moment you saw the cut. I watched you know it. You weren't surprised. You've done this before. You've knelt over the thing that nearly killed you, and put it in your pocket for later. Her throat had gone tight. Someone is trying to murder the king in his own valley, and the king is keeping the receipts. For half a heartbeat, something real moved behind his weathered eyes, and she thought, she was almost sure that he was going to tell her the truth. "You're bleeding," he said gently, instead. And she looked down, and she was a long, shallow cut across her forearm, where a splinter of the shattered pallet had opened her, blood beating bright against the pale grain. "Let's see to that," he said, and reached for her arm, and she pulled it out of his reach and stayed where she was. "Who are you?" she thought, looking at the king of the Carn kneeling in his own ruined granary with a murder wrapped up neat in his pocket. A fool playing king, or a king who's decided the safest disguise is a fool. She didn't know yet, but she was keeping a ledger on him too now, and the column of things that would not add up was getting longer by the day. For the better part of a month, Marin set herself to solving the king the way she'd solve a crooked account, patiently, from the edges, refusing to be hurried. It was the only sane response to a man who'd had a ton of grain dropped on his head, and then asked, over the cheese that same night, whether she thought the East Bays could be re-roofed before the spring rains. She knew it in her bones, so she did what she was good at. She watched, she gathered, she remembered, and the king, maddeningly, gave her nothing. She would ask a sharp question, and he would answer with a joke. She would press on the granary, and he would ask, grave as a judge, whether she thought gray suited him because Bracken had opinions. She'd corner him on who profited from a dead king, and he'd tell her she was formidable when she was suspicious, and slide the whole conversation 3 topics down the road before she'd noticed it moving. He handed her nothing she could use, and a great deal she had no idea what to do with, which was the trouble, the real trouble, the one she wouldn't name even to herself in the dark. Because the longer she watched him for danger, the more she simply watched him. It crept up on her the way a fever does, in symptoms she could each explain away. The night he leaned in the counting room doorway with the lamplight running down the line of his throat, and she lost the thread of her own sentence and had to pretend she'd meant to pause. The morning on the north wall at the gray edge of dawn, when he handed her a mug of the bitter black tea he'd got a taste for at the border, and his bare fingers brushed hers, and her whole arm lit to the shoulder, so that she nearly dropped the mug and covered it by glaring hard at the mountains. He was watching her when she looked back. He was always lately watching her. You've gone quiet, he observed. I'm thinking, you're not. You've that look you get when you're deciding whether to say the thing I won't enjoy. He turned to face her, both elbows on the cold stone, entirely unhurried. Go on. I've come to rather look forward to the things you won't enjoy telling me. She should have said something about the tea. She said, why me? Don't. She kept her eyes on the mountains, because she couldn't say it to his face. You could have kept your honest ledger without ever once bringing me a heel of bread at midnight. You could have set me to the accounts, and never come near the counting room. But you come every night. You feed me off your own kitchen board. You handed me your granaries because I made you laugh, which is not how kings are meant to make decisions. And I have spent a month trying to work out whether you're keeping me close because I'm useful, or because I'm a shield, or because... She stopped, appalled at where the sentence had been going. Or because, he said quietly. Don't, she said again, and it came out with none of the steel she'd meant to put in it. He was silent a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice had lost its glib edge entirely, gone low and careful, in a way she'd never heard from him. I have spent the whole of my life being wanted for what I could give people, he said, watching the dark valley. A blade, a border held, a name to shelter under, a throne to stand near. 3 years at the passes, and not one man out there wanted me. They wanted the thing that would keep them alive till morning. He turned his head. And then I came home and threw an apron down in front of a serving girl, and she looked at me like I was a sum that didn't add up, and I found I could not stop wanting to be looked at that way. So, you asked why you. There's part of your answer. I don't much like how it sounds, said out loud, but there it is. Marin's heart was doing something painful and enormous against her ribs. Every careful thing she'd built over a month of watching him told her that a clever man says exactly this to a woman he wants to keep clumsy, and that wanting to believe him was precisely how a girl from a ditch got made a fool of by a king. She knew that. Halden had taught her that, across 100 nights of counting, the highborn don't see the likes of us as anything but useful, girl. The day one tells you otherwise is the day you count your fingers after you shake his hand. She had carried that in her mouth for years. It had kept her safe. And she stood on the cold wall with the king's tea warming her hands, and the king's eyes on her face. And for the first time in her life, the warning felt less like wisdom and more like a wall someone else had built around her, while she was too young to know she was being walled in. That isn't an answer, she made herself say. That's a very good-sounding way of not giving one. You do it about the granary. You do it about the rope in your pocket. You're doing it now. Her voice had gone unsteady. I can't tell how much of you is real, Emeric, and I am so tired of walking on eggshells trying to work out which man I'm standing next to. The border name had slipped out, not Your Majesty, just Emmerich, and she watched it land on him, watched something in his still face crack straight down the middle. He set down his tea. He took one step toward her along the wall, slow, the way you approach a thing that might bolt, and stopped close enough that she had to tip her chin to hold his eyes, close enough that she could smell the cold stone and the black tea, and underneath it, warm and unmistakable, him. Then ask me something you can't dodge, he said very low. Ask me for the true thing, right now. And I'll give it to you, whatever it costs me. But only if you actually want it, Marin. Because once I've said it, neither of us gets to pretend I didn't. The wind came cold off the mountains. Her pulse was very loud. And she opened her mouth, not at all sure which of the 100 dangerous questions was going to come out of it. Ask me for the true thing, he'd said. And out of all the questions she'd hoarded for a month, the one that finally came out of her, there on the cold north wall, the king close enough to touch, was the smallest and the most dangerous. Do you actually want me? She said. Or do you only want the one person in this valley who won't lie to you? Because I can live as the second thing. I've been useful my whole life. But I need to know which it is before I— Her voice failed. Before I let it be the other. For a long moment he didn't answer, and she thought, that's my answer. He's deciding how to say it kindly. Then he reached up and cupped her jaw in one warm, calloused hand, careful as a man handling something he's been told is fragile and has decided for himself is not, and he said both. Gods help me, Marin. It's both. And it stopped being safe for me somewhere around the second night. You handed me a number I didn't want to hear, and dared me with your whole face to do something about it. His thumb moved along her cheek. Tell me to stop, and I'll go back to being your king, and never speak of it again, or don't. She didn't tell him to stop. She would never afterward be able to say who moved first, only that the wind and the wall and the whole sleeping valley went away at once, and there was only his mouth on hers, warm and certain, one hand in her hair, and the other at the small of her back, pulling her close until she could feel exactly how little of this was strategy. She leaned into him in a way she'd have been mortified by on any other night. Tonight there was no room in her for anything but him. And then it happened, the thing neither of them had reckoned on. It came through the place where they touched, sudden and total, him. Not his hands, not his heat, but the raw churn of what was underneath, a want so plain and helpless it stole her breath. And under the want, fear, and under the fear, a loneliness 3 years deep and bone-dry. She gasped and pulled back an inch and saw her own shock mirrored in his blown dark eyes. Did you? He started hoarse. That was you. Her heart was slamming. I felt. That was you. I felt what you— the bond, he breathed. And there was wonder in it. And something close to terror. Marin, that's a bond. A true one. That isn't a thing you can arrange or fake or— I know what it isn't. She was shaking. A ditch girl and a king did not share a true bond. The songs did not run that way, and yet there it was, humming between them, undeniable as a struck bell. She had spent a month certain she was being made a fool of, and here was the one thing in the world that could not lie, telling her he wanted her the way she wanted him, for no reason but wanting for no use at all. She kissed him again, and this time she let herself fall into it, and the bond opened wider, and it was the most reckless and the most true thing she had ever done, more reckless even than the apron, and she did not regret a single moment of it. That was the night before the Varn envoy came. The banquet was laid 3 days later in the Great Hall, the first table set for the northern Pax since the border wars. The beginning of the peace Emmerich had bled 3 years to buy. Ursa of the Viarn sat at his right hand, a lean gray alpha with a scar-split lip and eyes that missed nothing, there to decide whether the Karn King was strong enough to be worth a treaty. Marin stood where she always stood, at the watchful edge in blue silk now instead of an apron, and hating how the silk made her a target for every stare in the room. She saw the cup before she smelled it. A steward she didn't know, bearing the ceremonial cup for the king's welcome toast, and something in the way he carried it, too careful, too aimed, brought her wolf up snarling. Then the scent reached her, under the wine and the wood smoke, bitter, green, wrong, wolfsbane, or near enough to make no difference. She did not think. She crossed the dais in 4 strides, and struck the cup from the steward's hand the instant before it reached the king, and it shattered on the stone, wine spreading dark as blood across the flags, and the whole hall came to its feet. "Wolfsbane," she said, low, only for Emmerich dropping to a crouch over the spill with her pulse in her throat. "In the welcome cup. Meant for you." The color left his face. Then, and this was the thing that would eat at her later, it came back, and what replaced it was calculation. He gripped her wrist. Hard. "Say nothing," he breathed. "Yrsa is 10 feet away. If the Viharn see the Karn King poisoned at his own peace table, they'll ride home and tell the North I can't hold my own hall, and the war starts again by the next moon. Do you understand me? Not the envoy, not the court, no one. You just, no one, Marin." And then, gentler, the mask sliding back over the fear so smoothly it frightened her. "Trust me, just this once. I know what I'm doing." He rose, and turned to the hall, and laughed some easy lie about clumsy stewards and good Varn wine wasted, and the banquet breathed and settled, and Yrsa's cold eyes moved off him at last. Marin stood in the wreckage of the cup, and felt the bond humming with his fear, even as his face wore none of it, and she watched him move back into the crowd, smiling, gracious, untouchable, and then she watched him slip, between one turn and the next, out a side door into the dark. The smile dropped off his face the instant he thought no one could see. She gave him a count of 30, then she followed. She kept to the edges the way she'd kept to them her whole life, the one skill the silk couldn't take from her, down 2 turns of a servant's stair, and along a cold corridor to the old muniment room, where the pack kept its deeds and its dead men's records, and where a king celebrating a treaty had no earthly reason to be. The door stood a hand's width open. She pushed it. Emmerich was behind the record-keeper's table, with a strongbox open in front of him, and a sheaf of papers in one hand. And when he heard the door, he looked up, and for the first time since she'd known him, the man who always had the answer before you'd finished the question, who slid out of every corner sideways and smiling, Emmerich went still and said nothing at all. "This isn't what it looks like," he said finally. "Someone put poison in your cup an hour ago." Her voice came out, very flat. "You told me to say nothing, and then you came straight down here in the dark to break open a strong box in a room full of other men's records." Her throat had gone tight. "So tell me, Your Majesty, what is it then? What does it look like?" He set the papers down. When he spoke, his voice had gone quiet and careful. The smooth diplomatic one she'd heard him use on Yrsa, the one he had not used on her in weeks. Hearing it turned on her now was worse than a slap. "I've been investigating Halden," he said. The name didn't fit into the room. It was just a sound. "Halden keeps a tavern. Halden keeps a great deal more than a tavern." He came around the table and stopped when she stepped back. "Before the split antler, he was a pack enforcer. My father's before that. He knows this valley's every account and every back road, because he built half of them. The theft you found under Rurick's, the patient one, the clever one, the hand you couldn't name." He watched her face. "You couldn't name it because you learned to count at the elbow of the man who wrote it. Rurik grabs casks off carts. Halden's been bleeding this pack silently for a decade, selling its grain north to the very packs I was at the border bleeding to hold back, and the men who've tried 3 times to kill me have been carrying his coin." The floor went out from under her. "No, I needed someone close to him, someone he trusted, someone whose memory could hold the whole ledger at once and testify to it." He said it plainly, and every plain word was a stone. "And then you stood up on a chair in his own hall and handed me exactly that, In front of everyone. She heard herself say it from very far away. That's why you claimed me. In the receiving room. The apron. The king's own. You needed. Halden's girl, where you could use her. He didn't deny it. He held her eyes and did not say she was wrong. And that was the whole answer. He held the sheaf of papers out to her instead, his voice gone hoarse. Read it. If you won't take my word. It's his own hand. You'll know it better than I ever could. She did not take them. She could not have borne to see that careful, familiar script, laying out the ruin of everything she believed, because Halden was the one thing in her whole life that had never, not once, been a lie. Halden had pulled her out of the dirt when she was 11, and seen, in a feral, half-starved ditch girl, something worth a caught. Not everyone is like you, Your Majesty, she said, and let the tears come. Some people are simply what they say they are. Say it isn't, she whispered. Emeric? Say the bond, say the wall, say last night. Say one of them wasn't a way into him, say I'm wrong. It stopped being that. His voice roughened. Marin, I swear it, on the border dead. It started as cover and it stopped. The counting room, the wall, none of that was. Why didn't you just tell me? She was crying now, and didn't try to stop it, which she never did, and which was its own kind of surrender. You watched me throw myself in front of a falling ton of grain for you. You let me fall for you. And in all of it, you never once said, the man who pulled you out of the ditch is a traitor and I'm using you to hang him. Because I didn't think you'd believe me, barely above a breath. I didn't think you'd trust me over the one man who ever chose you. And I was right, wasn't I? Look at your face. You don't believe me now with the proof in my hand. It landed because it wasn't wrong, and she hated that it wasn't. Is that why you never told me? She pushed on, the tears coming hot now. Because you thought I was in it with him, his girl, his creature, planted at the king's own table to count you. No, the word came fast and flat and certain. God's no. If anything, Marin, you are the one soul in this keep I cleared the very first night. Why? Because you stood up in a starving hall and told 200 wolves that everything rotten in this valley was my fault. Mine. The king's. His mouth twisted. Half my court believes exactly that, and not one would ever breathe it to my face. You said it cold sober, to a stranger you'd never once looked at twice, for no reason but that it was true, and you were done swallowing it. A wolf in a conspiracy flatters the king. She means to bury. She doesn't climb on a chair and blame him to his teeth. That's how I knew. He took a half step, and when she didn't retreat, another. But it's worth the asking, isn't it? Was that your own conclusion? That the boy king was to blame for the lot of it? Or something the good tavern keeper spent years helping you to see? She opened her mouth and nothing came out, because she could hear it now. Halden, across 100 nights, bent over the tavern books, grinding his teeth over the supply lines and the contradictory orders and the highborn who couldn't be bothered to notice. A king ought to know what happens in his own house. Her words, on the chair. His words, first. She had carried his grievances in her own mouth for years, and never once noticed they were not hers. So, she reached past all of it, to the older and deeper wound, the one Halden's voice had carved into her, across those same counting nights. You know what I think, she said, wiping her face hard. I think men like you never see the likes of me as anything but useful. And I think I let myself forget it for exactly 1 month. And I think last night was the price of the lesson. She stepped back into the corridor. Keep your proof. Hang whoever you like. Just don't you dare call it a bond while you're doing it. Marin, she was already gone into the dark, her whole heart in pieces on a dead man's floor. And she got exactly 20 paces before a voice she'd trusted her entire life spoke gently out of the shadows. There you are, said Halden. God's girl, you're white as ash. Come here, tell me what he's done to you. And she walked straight into the arms of the traitor, because she did not yet know he was one, and let him hold her while she wept. He was so kind about it. That was the part she would never forget, how kind Halden was, stroking her hair in the dark corridor, murmuring that he'd feared it from the first, that a king does not claim a serving girl for love. I should have stopped it, he said. I should have kept you in the kitchen, where you were safe. But listen to me now, Marin, because it's worse than a broken heart, and you're the only one who can put it right. He drew back to look at her, his old scarred face grave and full of sorrow. He means to murder the Varn envoy tonight, Yrsa. Poison her and lay it at the North's own door, so the treaty collapses, and he gets his war of conquest after all. 3 more years of glory and every young wolf in this valley in the ground for it. I saw the order not an hour past, in his own hand. Marin stood very still in the circle of his arms, because she had spent that hour on the dais with her thumb in a puddle of poisoned wine, and Emmerich had been at her side the whole of it, and the poison in the cup had been meant for him. Halden had the story exactly backwards, not a little wrong, the way a frightened man gets things wrong, but precisely inverted, the way a man gets things wrong only when he is the one who arranged the truth in the first place. She knew that trick. She'd found it threaded through 3 years of ledgers. Hide your theft inside a true number. Take the real thing that happened and turn it a half step so it points at someone else. The floor of her went cold and quiet and terribly clear. It was Halden, the patient hand, the second thief, the coin in the assassin's pockets. The man who'd pulled her from a ditch had also, across all those same years, been pulling the strings of a beta's greed and a poisoner's blade. And now he stood in the dark with his arms around her, trying to make his own murder into the king's. And she understood, with a lurch that nearly buckled her, the shape of the whole of it, even the oldest part. He's too busy to notice. The highborn only want us for use. A king doesn't claim a serving girl for love. Every grievance she'd carried in her mouth since she was 11. She'd thought them her own. They were his. He'd been counting on her to carry them her whole life, and tonight, he was counting on her to carry them into the one room where they could bring a king down. She could have gone for him then. Her hand actually twitched toward the little paring knife she'd carried since her tavern days, still in her belt from the banquet. But no. One waitress against a former enforcer who owned the loyalty of half the guard and all of Rurik's men. Not here. Not on his terms. So, she did the hardest thing she had ever done. She let her face crumple, and she leaned back into his chest, and she made her voice small and broken, and exactly what he wanted to hear. "What do we do?" she whispered, his arms tightened, satisfied. "We go to Yrsa before he can. A king who'd murder an envoy under a peace banner isn't fit to rule, and the Varn will say so, and the good houses will steady the valley after he falls. But it can't come from me. I'm a tavern keeper, they'll say." I reached above my station. His voice went soft, almost tender, the killing stroke, dressed as comfort. It has to come from someone they'll believe. It has to come from the king's own. From you. He tipped her chin up with one finger, the way he had when she was small and crying. You tell Yrsa you saw Emmerich order it, and no soul in that room will doubt a single word. Marin made herself nod against his hand. There, he murmured, and there was real fondness in it, which was the most horrifying part of all. I only ever wanted you safe, girl. I told you, didn't I, what men like him do, with the likes of us. I tried to keep you in the kitchen where he'd never see you. You'll remember that. After that, I tried. And she understood, standing there, letting him stroke her hair, that the love had always been a hook, and that he had been patiently fishing with it since the winter he found her in the ditch. Every kindness, a length of line. Every lesson, a barb. He had raised her to be exactly this, a memory that forgot nothing, and a heart that would carry his grievances to the grave, and never think to ask whose they were. They walked. It was the longest walk of her life, up through the cold halls toward the East Council room where the Vyarn had been given quarters, Halden's hand warm and steady between her shoulder blades, steering her the way he'd steered her toward 100 small errands since she was a child. She had to get into that room and turn his trap inside out. And she had nothing to turn it with. No proof in her hand, no guard at her back, no rank that would let her contradict a respected elder in front of a foreign alpha. One wrong word and the Varn rode home and the border burned again, and every young wolf in the valley paid for it in the spring mud, and yet she turned her one poor weapon over and over as they climbed. She had her word against a beloved elders, but she also had the one thing Halden had never once thought to fear, because he was the very man who had spent 15 years sharpening it. A memory that forgot nothing, and that had, in the last quarter hour, finished counting him down to the last stolen crown. He had built her into a blade for his own hand. He had simply never imagined she might turn in it. The doors stood open. Yrsa of the Viharn sat at the long table with her scarred captains ranged behind her. And there, standing at the window, with his back to the door, was Emmerich, who turned when he heard them come in, and whose whole face lit for one unguarded instant at the sight of her, before he saw whose arm she walked in on, and the light went out like a snuffed candle. He thought she'd come to bury him, envoy, said Halden, bowing low. Forgive the hour. But you have been gravely wronged, and the king's own bride is here to tell you how. Every face in the room turned to Maren, silent, by the door. Go on, girl, Halden said gently. Tell her grace what you saw. Every face in that room was already sure of her. The Varn Alpha leaned forward, hungry for the thing that would justify riding home to war. Halden's men counted her, one of their own, already halfway to done. And Emmerich looked at her across the length of the council table, with an expression she would carry to the end of her days. Not fear, not pleading, only a terrible quiet acceptance. The face of a man watching the last person he trusted come to finish him, and deciding not to blame her for it. She looked back at him. I'm sorry, she told him with no words at all. I should have believed you an hour ago. I believe you now. Then she turned to Yrsa of the VH. I saw nothing of the sort, Maren said, because it never happened. Halden is lying to you, and I can tell you the exact hour he chose the lie. The room snapped tight as a bowstring. Beside her, she felt Halden go rigid. He says, the king ordered your murder within the hour, she went on, her voice finding a level she hadn't known it had, the voice she'd used once on a chair in a starving hall. But within the hour, the king was on the dais at his own banquet, in front of 200 wolves and yourself, envoy. He never left my side. I know, because I spent that hour on my knees in his spilled wine after I struck a poisoned cup out of a steward's hand before it reached the king's mouth. The wolf's bane wasn't meant for you, envoy. It was meant for him. It is the third time in 2 months someone has tried to put the king of the Cairn in the ground. Her chin came up, and every time, the coin in the killer's purse has traced back one man. So don't take my word. Take his ledgers. Search the strongbox in the muniment room, and the cellar under the split antler, while their keeper is standing in this room and can't reach either, and see whether you find a wronged envoy or a paymaster's accounts and grain notes sold north to your own enemies. For a long breath, no one in the room moved. Then Yrsa of the Viharn turned her scarred, unhurried stare from Maren to Halden and back again, weighing the two of them the way a trader weighs coin on a palm. And Maren watched the exact instant the weight came down. The serving girl had given dates and figures and a poisoned cup 100 wolves had seen shatter. And the elder had given only sorrow and a story that pointed conveniently at a king. This is hysteria, Halden said, and the gentle old grief cracked clean off his voice, and what was underneath it was cold as a cellar. She's distraught. She's besotted with the man. Of course she'll defend him. He's turned her head. He did not turn my head, Maren said. You did. You've had it turned since I was 11. But you made one mistake, Halden. You taught me to count, and you never once thought I'd count you. Then a search cost you nothing, said Yrsa of the Varn quietly, and nodded to her captains. The kind old tavern keeper who'd pulled a girl from a ditch was simply gone, and what stood in his place was a cornered thing that had run out of room. He moved the way she'd never once seen him move in 15 years, fast and sure, and toward her, and the little skinning knife was out of his sleeve and driving toward her before anyone else in the room had drawn breath.
Marin.
Emeric's voice, raw with a terror, the bond, carried straight into her chest. But this, at last, was a thing she knew how to do, not a warrior's move. She was no warrior and never had been. It was a tavern move, a ditch move. The first thing he'd ever taught her in the alley behind the antler when she was 12 and mouthy and small. Watch the hands, girl. In a fight and in a bargain, always the hands. She was already watching his. She turned inside the knife instead of away from it, caught the wrist she'd watched 1,000 times, pour and count and deal, and used his own lunging weight to fold him down over her hip and onto the stone. The knife skittered away, her knee came down between his shoulders. She put her mouth close to his ear, and her voice did not shake. "You taught me to watch the hands, Halden," she said. "You should have remembered I never forget anything." Then the Viharn captains had him and hauled him up, and it was after 15 years, simply done. They took Rurik within the hour, grabbing casks, was easy to hang once the man who'd covered for him was in irons, and both went out of Carnhold, in chains before dawn. And the treaty, gods help them all. And then the council room emptied, the way rooms do, after the worst has passed, until it was just the two of them, the king and the girl who'd filled his cup. Emeric hadn't moved. He was staring at her as though she'd walked out of a wall. "You saved my life," he said. "After everything you still. I came to stop a traitor." She heard how flat her own voice was and couldn't warm it. That's all. Not 1 second of it was forgiveness. The hope went out of his face slowly, like heat off a stone at nightfall. "The bond's real," he said. "You felt it on the wall. It doesn't come to wolves like me by wanting it. I'd have wanted it my whole life, if wanting were enough. It came anyway. It came for you. Marin, it doesn't matter if it's real. You can't feel a bond through a locked door, Imeric. And I'm going to lock it." It was the cruelest thing she had ever said, and she said it because it was armor, and she needed the armor to get out of that room on her own 2 feet. "You looked me in the eye for a month. You let me love you. And the whole time you were spending the one true thing I ever owned. A bond doesn't buy that back. Being fated to a man does not make him a man you can trust." "I love you," he said, and the charm was gone, and the crown was gone, and what was left was just a wolf saying a plain thing. "I don't care how it started. That doesn't change what it became. You are the truest thing I have ever, don't." She stepped back before the word could reach the place it was aimed at. "Don't you dare say it like it unpicks the rest, like a bond and a pretty word set the ledger straight." Her voice was shaking now, and she let it. "I spent my whole life being useful to men who called it love when it suited them. I let myself forget that for exactly 1 month. Don't make me pay for it twice." He flinched, as though she'd struck him. "I'm sorry," he said. "Gods, Marin, I don't want your sorry." She turned for the door, on legs that barely held her up. "I'm glad you're alive. You'll be a good king now the rot's cut out. The valley will eat this winter because of what happened in this room." A beat at the threshold, without turning round. "But I can't be near you, and I don't know that I ever will be again." She saw it land in the one glance she let herself take. The understanding arriving behind his eyes, that he had broken a thing, no proof, no bond, and no crown could ever set back whole. He didn't chase her. He had learned, at least, that much. "Not to chase, Marin. Please," he said to her back. "I'll do anything. I'll spend the rest of it." She walked out and closed the bond behind her, like a shutter against a gale, and did not let herself feel how hard. On the far side of it, he went on holding the door. She'd been keeper of the stores for half a year, and she was good at it, which she'd always known she'd be. Carnhold, was a different place now. Halden and Rurik sat in the deep cells beneath the old fort. A decade of their rot cut clean out of the pack. The East Rose ate, that winter, the granaries filled, and the widow Sina drew a pension in coin that actually existed. The valley had begun, cautiously, to love the king for it, while he spent every one of those 6 months trying to win back the one wolf who wouldn't. He did it badly, and he did it beautifully. No jewels. He'd learned her better than that. He sent the things she couldn't dismiss. The east granary re-roofed before the spring rains, exactly as she'd once said it should be. The widow's pension doubled, with a note that said only you counted her first. At the war table twice a week, he would catch her eye across the maps with his whole face gone hopeful and undefended, and she would look down at the tallies and say nothing, and hate how much the nothing cost her. The bond didn't help. Leave one open and it deepens. Leave it shut and it aches. There is no third door. She kept it shut and hoped it would wither and let her go. And it would not. Then, on an ordinary gray morning, in the 6th month, Tobin came into her counting room, the particular color of a boy who has made a very large mistake. Iva, grim, behind him. "He's gone," Iva said. "The king." Not in his chambers, not in the hall, not anywhere. His sword's on its stand and his horse is in the stall, and no one's seen him since the night bell. Marin was on her feet before she'd decided to be. Wake the trackers. Quietly, no bells, no alarm. If the valley thinks the king's been taken, we'll have a panic by noon. Taken. The word tasted like the granary and the poisoned cup, and every way she'd ever counted a king could die. The trackers caught his scent at the east postern and lost it, the way a scent stops when a man is being careful or being carried. There was one way left to find him. She'd known it since Iva said gone. She stood in the cold courtyard and pressed a hand flat to her own chest, over the door she'd been holding shut for half a year. It's duty, she told herself. He's the king. Finding him is the job. It was not only that, and she knew it. And she opened the bond anyway. It hit her like a door, kicked off its hinges. Sorrow first, deep and bottomless, the twin of the one she'd been carrying. Then muddle, his thoughts loose and drifting and slow. Not the sharp, clean terror of a man in a killer's hands, something warmer and far more stupid. He wasn't taken, he was drunk. She followed the bond out of the keep and through the waking lower town, and it pulled her, of course, exactly where it had all begun. The split antler, warm light in its windows in the gray dawn. She hit the door low and ready, braced for a blade or a body, and stopped dead. There was only the king of the cairn, slumped half across the bar at the far end, collar open, hair a catastrophe, one hand curled around a cup, talking with enormous earnestness to a deeply uncomfortable night barman, and knotted around his waist, absurd over the fine dark coat, was a battered gray serving apron. Her old apron, the one she'd thrown down on a table in front of the whole pack. "He's been here since the 3rd bell," the barman said, weak with relief at the sight of her. "Won't leave. Keeps saying he took the apron, and he means to earn it." "I did take it," Emmerich informed the room, not yet seeing her. She dared any wolf in this hall to keep the king's table better than she did. "So, I've been keeping a table." He gestured grandly at the single upturned stool he'd apparently been writing for hours. "It's very hard." She never said it was this hard. That's rather the whole point, isn't it? Gods, she's always making a point. He found his cup empty and held it out. "Another?" "No," said Marin, and plucked it clean out of his hand. "That's enough." His head came up. "Sadhe." His eyes found her face and stuck, and then his whole ruined expression cracked wide open into something so helplessly glad it hurt to look at. And through the bond still open, she felt it hit him all at once, joy and disbelief and 6 months of grief breaking like a wave. "You came," he breathed. "You vanished off the face of the valley," she said, low and furious, because fury was easier than the other thing. "No guard, no word. The whole guard is out." I opened the bond. Emmerich, I thought you were. Her voice caught. I thought someone had you. Someone does, he said, muzzy and certain, and laid his hand over his own heart, over his side of the thread. You've had me since the granary, longer. He swayed on the stool. You closed your door, I felt it, every day for 6 months. He ran out of words and dropped his forehead into his hand. But you won't have me. And I can't stop wanting to be had. You should have told me the truth, she said. It came out unsteady. Yes, he nodded into his hand. Wretched. I was a coward. I was so afraid you'd choose him over me that I never gave you the chance to choose me. That's the worst thing I've done. Worse than the cover. He looked up, and even drunk, even wearing her apron like a fool, what came through the bond was the plainest thing she'd ever felt. No angle, no mask. The man who hid everything, hiding nothing at all. He spent your whole childhood teaching you a girl from a ditch could never be wanted for anything but use. And you believe it still. His voice dropped. He was wrong, Marin. Wrong on purpose. I'd have told you 100 times over if I'd been brave enough. She stood there with his cup in her hand and could not speak. So he drew himself up with enormous, wobbling dignity. I'm being brave now. I'm a wreck. I'm wearing your apron, and I'll never do this well. So I'll do it badly. His eyes were sliding half shut. Keep me, Marin. I dare you. You dared a king across a whole hall once. Here's one daring you back, in an empty tavern. Nobody watching, nothing to win. Keep me, bind me, marry me. I'll spend my whole life proving I never once only needed you. The bravado fell away all at once, and what was left was small and raw and undefended. I'm no good without you. I rattle around this valley like a coin in a jar. Please. The bond poured it all through, unguarded. The love, the terror. 6 months of missing her, no performance. Nothing held back. I won't ask again, he mumbled, eyes falling shut. I said I'd stop. I'll stop. Ask me tomorrow, she heard herself say. When you can stand up straight. When you'll remember I said it. Her throat was tight, and her eyes were stinging, and she realized, smiling, for the first time in 6 months. Some tabs are too big to settle with a drunk man. Ask me sober and find out. And you'll say yes, he breathed, hopeful and slurring and already going. And then the king of all the Karn passed out cold against her shoulder, his head lolling into the crook of her neck, his breath warm and even and reeking of the antler's worst ale, one arm still stubbornly through her apron strings. Marin stood in the gray dawn light of the tavern where she'd been 11 and hungry and no one, and held up the whole sleeping weight of the most powerful wolf in the valley, and pressed a kiss to his ruined hair and whispered into it, "Ask me tomorrow." And find out. In the end, it took him 4 months. 4 months of asking every single day, sober, in every way a man could manage, and a few no sensible man should. He asked across the war table until Eva threatened to hand in her post in writing. He asked on the north wall, with the black tea going cold in both their hands. He asked once with so many wildflowers that the counting room smelled like a funeral for a week, and Tobin wouldn't stop sneezing. He asked badly, and he asked beautifully, and every single time Marin told him to ask again tomorrow, until one perfectly ordinary morning, she looked up from the grain tallies at the man, grinning hopefully at her over the maps. The whole valley turned out for it, the boy king nobody had trouble to come home for, and the ditch girl who'd counted the truth of him before anyone else bothered to look. He cried during the binding. She'd known he would. She didn't quite, but it was a near thing, and the bond, wide open now and never to be shut again, gave her away completely, and he laughed at her through his own tears until she stopped caring who saw. "You're stuck with me now," he murmured when it was done, his forehead against hers. "It's on every ledger in the valley. No wiping the slate." "Why would I wipe it?" said Marin. "I'm the one who threw the apron down first, if you recall. In front of everyone. Best dare of my life, the king agreed, and I lost it magnificently. She kissed him, and for once in her life, she didn't argue.